Hey everybody, welcome to the Sustainability in Motion podcast, brought to you by ED4S. We focus on the fast-moving sustainability world to help the business community better understand sustainability and the environmental challenges we face. I'm Matt Orsag, Chief Content Officer at ED4S.
And I'm Maria Maisurate, CEO and founder at ED4S.
We have as our guest today Helen Neal, founder and CEO of HN Communications, a sustainability communications company that helps other companies effectively tell their sustainability story and avoid greenwashing. Helen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Great to have you, Helen. So let me just start with a quick context. Recent studies from Responsible Investment Association of Canada has published survey results that said 50% of investors, retail investors in Canada, are actually skeptical or not investing in sustainable investing because they are afraid of greenwashing. And the other 50% are lacking knowledge about the products. So at ED4S, we're tackling the knowledge piece, and we're really excited to have you today to unpack the greenwashing part and try to figure out what are possible solutions to move the whole industry forward. So before we get started, could you tell us a little bit more about your work at HN Communications and what kind of clients you work with?
Yeah, sure. So we are a sustainability communications agency. So we really help primarily large global clients and global NGOs to communicate on their sustainability work. So we really help them to, I guess very much we're in the business of kind of building trust and confidence in this space, because I think particularly now more than ever, there is a huge sense of, and you read out some amazing, worrying statistics there, but I think there's a lot of mistrust, there's a lot of lack of credibility, and it's forcing a lot of businesses to remain silent and not communicate on these sorts of topics, which equally is a problem in itself. So I think we're very much in the business of helping companies and organizations get comfortable and have the right tools and the right approach to communicating on sustainability with confidence. And that's really what we try and do, and we work with our clients to do successfully.
Yeah, trust is such a big part of the PR, right? So what kind of industry do you usually tackle?
I mean, it can be very varied. We work across food and beverage. So we work with organizations like Heineken, the Japanese beer brand Asahi that also create food and beverage. We work with Bosch, so home appliances. But we also work with car companies. We've worked with Nissan in the past and Aston Martin. But we also work with global NGOs as well. So we work with organizations like Climate Group. They're a large, very pragmatic NGO that works with business, but they also run Climate Week New York as well. And we work a lot with them around New York. And so we're really fascinated by those really hard to decarbonize type global businesses that have multiple challenges in different countries, complex supply chains, and are really trying to figure out how they want to move forward on sustainability, but how to do so in a way that has real impact and that they can communicate that impact with a sense of honesty, but also humility at the same time, which is obviously very different to how businesses have perhaps traditionally PR'd themselves. So we try and unpick a little bit of that for them and help them to communicate in sustainability in a slightly different way to perhaps they've always communicated before.
Well, we're here. We had you on to talk about, greenwashing, which is such a big issue, both on the investor side and the company side. And you mentioned a little bit of greenhushing as well, like companies stepping back and not wanting to say anything, rather than say something. How would you, I guess to kind of set the baseline for people, how would you define those terms and the way you see them in your work, greenwashing and greenhushing, if you want to get into that as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think greenwashing is essentially you are communicating about sustainability in a particular way that really lacks any depth, any data to back up your claims, any paper trail really that a consumer or an investor could investigate and see a clear trail as to how you've come to the statement that you have made. So having very clear fact-based statements that are that are backed up and often third-party verified. We always say it's always good to have everything in terms of statistics and data third-party verified, just like you do with any of your financial reporting data. We always say one of the best ways to think about sustainability is to treat it in the same rigor and approach that you would do any of your financial reporting. Because if you start to think about it in that way, you avoid a lot of the greenwashing mistakes. But essentially, greenwashing is you're making claims, sweeping statements without facts or data to back it up. Or perhaps you may talk about one thing or make a statement about one area, but not give the full context and picture, so that you're really showing just one very positive element about your sustainability without explaining all of the challenges and difficulties that you might be having elsewhere. So it's hard and it's complex, and it's a different way to how businesses have communicated before. But greenwashing is essentially, I think, that space around just not giving enough credible evidence and data to back up what you're saying. Greenhushing is slightly different I think you touched on it a moment ago, in that because there is a growing fear of getting it wrong because of the greenhushing, and because we're seeing, and we'll probably touch on this a bit more, we're seeing more and more regulations across the globe growing around this area. A lot of businesses are much more reluctant now than ever to talk about any of the work that they're doing in sustainability for fear of getting it wrong. And in terms of getting it wrong, that could be an impact in terms of your reputational impact with your investors and consumers. It could also be a regulatory impact, and we've seen businesses that have been fined because they have poorly communicated or made greenwashing claims, which of course many of them have. I don't believe any business intends to greenwash, but they slip up, they make mistakes, and this, I think, has caused a lot of businesses to really step back from even communicating on this, which in our view is a big problem in itself, because if you're not communicating about it, you're withholding information. And also, it's really important to your consumers and to your investors to understand the work that you are doing in this space.
Yeah, I'm curious, just a bit of a follow-up. I'm curious that you've seen this, you've been doing this for quite a while. How has the sophistication of the companies you work with to understand these issues grown and changed over the years? Like, I'm assuming they come to you with more knowledge about greenwashing, greenhushing, and they're coming to you because they know the landscape. They know it could be fraught with landmines. I'm just curious, Maria and I have been in the sustainable investing world for a long time, but the sustainable communications world, I'm guessing it has evolved in that. I'm just trying to gauge how companies have grown in sophistication of their understanding of these issues.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think what's happened, perhaps even over the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen, if we rewind sort of 5 years ago, there was a big trend for a lot of businesses, you may remember, who were really keen to come out with quite ambitious targets about how they were going to decarbonize. And that we were in this phase of, coming out, setting targets, setting goals, and these were, celebrated. Oh, isn't this great? This organization is, committing to net zero by 2050. This is amazing, But very quickly after that, of course, then people say, okay, this is great, but how are you going to get there? And I think businesses realized that they needed to develop roadmaps in terms of how they were actually really going to get to net zero by a particular date. And as they started to work through those plans, I think businesses then started to realize, this is really difficult. And in fact, there are perhaps some areas where we simply don't know yet how we're going to change that piece of our business operation in order to reach those targets. And I would say this has been happening over the past kind of 3+ years or so, where really starting to hone down on making progress on these commitments now has become a lot more challenging. And I think the reality is, for a lot of businesses, in fact, I haven't met one single business that doesn't have some area of their business where they're not 100% sure how they're going to get there. But the truth is, that's also okay. Because I think part of the point here is to say we don't have all the answers, but we're trying. So I think that has been happening over the past 3 or 4 years. And then, of course, in the past year, we've seen a huge shift, both politically, but also I think because now businesses have seen how other organizations have got it wrong and the consequences of what happens when you do get that wrong, both from a reputational point of view and from a regulatory point of view, there's a reluctance on both fronts from that push from the regulation and the reputational, but also now we're seeing changes that have happened in the US have made businesses even more reluctant to talk about this space. So it's almost had a bit of a double whammy effect. So I think we saw more and more businesses start to come to us about 3 years ago once they'd made their statements and their targets. But actually, when they started to sit around the boardroom and say, okay, how are we actually going to do this? And how do we talk about how we're going to do this? I think is where we started to see businesses come and say, you know what, we need some help here.
This episode is brought to you by ED4S, the sustainability training solution designed for scalable workforce training. ED4S makes it easy to build, launch, and maintain time-efficient, role-specific sustainability training for your teams. Developed by industry experts and trusted by leading organizations worldwide, visit ed4s.org to download a free case study and see how ED4S can work for you.
Yeah, really interesting. That ties so well into the next question I had for you. And for the context, basically, the financial sector is just on top of an entire economy, right? So you're talking about the challenges that companies face. And the financial sector is just investing across all of those different industries. And ultimately saying we don't really have much power to control those companies that need to decarbonize. So just one of the recent examples, we're recording this on June 2nd, and just last week, one of the biggest Canadian pension funds, public pension funds, announced they're stepping away from their commitments on net zero. And so that is highly concerning. But the excuse they're saying is twofold. One is the recent regulation we had in Canada to combat greenwashing. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But the second one is basically saying that even though we're such a huge asset owner, asset manager, we still don't have the power to influence companies in our portfolios to decarbonize. So by default, the financial institutions are like one step away from the action. And so for them, especially making the net zero commitments in the economy, which is not net zero aligned, is very, very difficult. So communications starts to be a big challenge. And so in the light of all of this, I was curious to know, how do you see the companies now readjusting their messages, and how are they shifting their perspectives, and what kind of internal change management does that require?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I will answer that in one moment, but I just want to come to the point that you make about the investor community and perhaps some of those, like the Canadian pension fund you mentioned, kind of moving away from this space. Because it's interesting that I find when I listen to businesses, that business conversation is very much about, the drive from investors or the demand from investors is a really important push for them to move in this direction as well. So it's almost, two different sides of the coin, really. But so it's interesting to hear it from your perspective, because certainly I hear from the business community world how important it is for investors to remain strong on this point and to demand that from the businesses that they're investing in. But I do think in the past 12 months, there has been a quietly stepping back from that. And we have also seen that from some, high profile businesses as well that have stepped back from some of their commitments. So I think one of the big ways in which businesses have changed, even in the past 12 months, when we've seen, shifts in governments in the US particularly, has been a big driver for this, is I think businesses have started to ask the question, are we communicating about sustainability in the right way at all? And I think there is a growing need now for businesses to start communicating on sustainability in a way that resonates around a boardroom. and that it resonates with the CFO, it resonates with the COO, it resonates with HR, it resonates with all of the key people that need to sit around the boardroom. And I think businesses are starting to look at how do we make sure that sustainability is fully embedded in our overall strategy. So it's not an add-on, it's not a nice to do, it's not a tick box. It is fully embedded in our overall strategy. And it needs to make good business sense for us as a business. And when I say good business sense, that can mean it needs to de-risk us as a business and an organization. It needs to potentially help us long-term with future growth. It needs to help manage our future supply chains. It needs to help build our brand and our consumer awareness. There are a number of factors where sustainability can be a business advantage, but we must start couching it in the language of business. And I think for a long time, and my community and us, we are responsible for, I think, getting a little bit wrong in this space, where I think the language around sustainability has for a very long time been about, it's just the right thing to do. We need to do this to save our planet. And don't get me wrong, I don't believe that that's not correct, but I don't think it's enough to take everyone on this journey, and we need everyone on this journey if we are to succeed. And so I think there has been, we've made some mistakes about not bringing business with us. Of course, there are some businesses that fully support and are engaged on this from a real altruistic point of view and believe that it is the right thing to do and where they want to take their organization. But there are plenty of businesses out there that have just said, you know what, this is not right. This doesn't fit into our business plan. So I think we've got to get better at how we make sustainability make good business sense. And I have absolutely seen in the past 12 months that need and that focus has accelerated, because I think largely the shift in the political world.
So I just want to follow up on the point about the organizational structure. You mentioned the business case for CFO, CEO, etc. And this is something we really preach at ED4S. The sustainability needs to be embedded across the organization throughout different business units, and there's got to be a clear case for it. So historically, as CSR was more of a predominant way of doing things, a lot of this functions and sustainability work, so-called, was sitting with the communications marketing teams, right? And for me, sometimes it's even a way to gauge how serious the company is about sustainability, is where the sustainability team belong in terms of a corporate structure. Is it with a strategy team? Is it with legal? Is it with communications? Just very quickly, where do you see currently most of the sustainability teams in terms of a corporate structure? Where do they belong right now?
I mean, where I see them and perhaps where they belong are maybe two slightly different things. I think where I see them currently in existence is they're often either part of a corporate communications or corporate affairs team that kind of, I guess, straddle between the kind of regulatory, the legal, and the communications. I don't often see them directly in the marketing teams, but I think best practice is where a sustainability lead and a marketing lead work jointly together on a marketing project from the get-go. But if you to ask me, where do I think it needs to be? I wonder whether actually the ideal is about not even having a CSO anymore, and that you have a business that embeds sustainability across all of your key business functions. So all of the members around the board table, and each one of them has accountabilities and KPIs benchmarked against their role and their business function in order to deliver on sustainability for the business. For me, I actually think that is the long-term aim of how you make real impact in this space and how you make it work for your business. But I think we're nowhere near there yet, but I think ideally that is where I believe it perhaps needs to go.
Yeah. I agree with you. I don't think I've seen organizations that have done it that way. I guess it does require still a certain leadership oversight, watching the regulation. But there are organizations that are embedding sustainability as part of the KPIs and remuneration for executives. So I think it's moving, but such an embedded, complete, dissolved sustainability is still far away.
Yeah. And I have seen some businesses who will, like with making CapEx decisions internally within their business, they're now putting a sustainability EBITDA into their decision-making process. So as well as costing up new investments and projects to administer from a financial point of view, they're also calculating it from a carbon impact point of view as well. And so they're being able to make informed decisions about the sustainability impacts of doing these new actions and activities as much as the financial cost, which goes back to my point earlier. And I think it, with your community, there's a lot, I think, for sustainability to learn and develop, but also for sustainability to be embedded into the same rigor and structures and process as financial reporting as it is, for the finance part of an organization.
Well, that leads well into the next thing we wanted to talk about, which is going back to how ESG and sustainability started. A lot of this stuff started out as voluntary or best practices, moved into, of course, it's thing that should naturally do, into regulation and laws. For example, Canada's Bill C-59 just tackled greenwashing before there was really a clear standard set. And we wanted to get your thoughts on how does this compare? What are you seeing in the UK, in the US, the level of regulation, what's working, what isn't in those markets? And of course, if you had your magic wand, how would you make it work better through regulation if possible?
Yeah, I think what Canada's done is, I genuinely think they've done it really well. I think it'll be really interesting to see how it kind of unfolds over the next couple of years and how businesses are responding to it and how much teeth it is able to have in terms of impact and management. But I think in principle, I think it has gone some way into really focusing in on this. And I hope that organizations in Canada see it actually as useful rather than painful, because I think one of the big things that I see time and time again for businesses, there's such a lack of clarity and framework in which to help businesses make sure they're doing the right thing. I really do believe that the vast majority of businesses want to do the right thing. I don't think they want to greenwash, but I think the challenge at the moment has been that there's been very little guidance and regulation out there to support businesses to feel comfortable that if they do this, they're doing it so in a clear framework. I think in the UK, we're perhaps a little bit behind. We're not perhaps quite as far as where Canada is at the moment, but I think that there is quite a big consumer awareness here. And I think anti-greenwashing has been driven a lot in the UK by consumer and reputational impact over regulation. I think within Europe, there are some regulations that will be coming into force that are having quite a driving effect for European businesses, but of course, global businesses that do business in Europe as well. And again, I think this is helping to give more of a clearer framework. And then lastly, in the US, I think whilst there are some regulations out there, I don't think that they're fully embedded yet. And I do wonder whether these are things that are going to just fizzle out for the time being and whether these things don't get picked up for a while. But of course, there are a lot of US businesses that don't just operate in the US and will need to be acutely aware of what is happening in Canada, Europe, Asia, and beyond. So, and I think therefore what that does is we still have a patchwork of regulatory requirements within this space around greenwashing. So it's a step in the right direction. But I think if I was to wave a magic wand, what we need is some form of global standard to help global businesses who, at the end of the day, these are the businesses that I believe have the real power and impact to implement meaningful change within their carbon reduction and their environmental impact. Because everything often flows through from those big global businesses that are so powerful. So I think being able to have a global standard in this space that governments can agree to and that businesses have a clear steer on, I think would be the ultimate objective here. But, let's be realistic and celebrate the moves that are being made as a starting point, I think.
Yeah, well, I can share in Canada, it's not as much celebrated as you would think it would. And actually what it's causing is a lot of greenhushing now. And so companies that were not necessarily doing it at a level of rigor as it is kind of expected from this new bill are stepping away, are just deleting their commitments and hushing down everything in their communications. And so the question becomes is that, well, at least they had a bit of incentive to do something. And now that they can't even communicate at all about it, now do they even have an interest to do anything at all? So it's an interesting debate to have whether or not the greenwashing legislation, a stick approach in Canada, has led to a bit of a cleanup among the companies. The ones that were doing it for real are continuing and still talking about it. But the other ones are going back to the drawing board and probably going back to thinking what you just mentioned earlier. How does it matter for a business? How do we translate into KPIs? Because at the end of the day, if you're doing it as a marketing exercise, it has been proven through so many research studies that it's just a cost center. So you are not investing, you're just incurring more costs. You're doing reporting, that's great, but it's not really driving any revenues or increased risk management abilities. And that leads me to our final question for you. Speaking specifically about the communications professionals, right? Like in marketing, we're always expected to make everything look extra shiny and extra interesting. And sustainability is a bit of a different type of beast. And so could you share with us, how should marketing communications and PR individuals think about sustainability? What kind of changes does this require in their approach? And maybe how does education have to actually evolve to make sure they're prepared to talk about these things with confidence?
Yeah. So I always say that the way in which you communicate as an organization about your product or your service is not the way that you should communicate on sustainability. So I think inherently, businesses, organizations, they are there to, let's just talk about, businesses for the time being. They're there to sell a product or a service. And there's nothing wrong with that. These are businesses that are growing a profit, and I'm all for that. But in order to do that, you have to put your best foot forward. You have to create the best selling points. You want to show your organization in the best light. You want to promote all of the good things. This is all completely normal and how businesses have operated for, many, many years to sell their goods and their products. And I think it's all very well known and how the marketing departments do this really successfully. And that's great. But the moment you start to embed those same skill sets and principles into sustainability is the moment that you start to get stuck and you start to get into the realms of unintentional greenwashing. And this is why we've seen so many, large scale, well-known businesses, the KLMs of this world, the Dieselgate with Volkswagen, all of these businesses, I feel, and I don't want to get into all the detail of it, but I think that it came unstuck because the approach was always about how to put things in the best light. And we were talking earlier, when it comes to sustainability, there is a simple framework of being able to communicate the data and to show your progress and to show how you have made progress, but also the challenges that you have faced along the way, and be comfortable enough as an organization to also share the difficulty and where things are not working out so well, but also explain what you're putting in place in order to move forward. And also to bring in third parties, particularly NGOs and regulatory bodies that can actually support the communications from a validation and verification process to really help bolster that level of credibility. So it's absolutely possible to communicate positively on sustainability, but do so in a way with full honesty, accountability, rigor, and third-party validation. And it's okay to say, we are working towards this goal. We're not there yet. We don't have all the answers. We're trying, and this is where we have made an impact, and this is where we still have got work to do, but we're working on it. And I think if you can take that type of approach to your sustainability communications, this will go a long way in order to de-risk you and give you the confidence to talk about this topic rather than shy away from it and not talk about it at all.
I think that's a great point that we can see over the years has been a problem. Because as you say, companies are used to have marketing departments and PR departments that are selling a product or service. And you can't really, what you're selling with sustainability is integrity. And you can't really sell integrity. You need to communicate integrity. And it's a subtle thing. You're telling a story. You're not, I think too much of, an advertising or PR firm gets in. That's how they do things. They sell something. How do I sell this product? How do I sell this message? But the people who care about sustainability, they don't want to be sold to. They want to have a conversation. And I think there's been missteps from firms and investors in not understanding that nuance. But that's a great point to bring up.
Yeah. I think any business that goes into this thinking that the communications they do on sustainability is a mechanism in which to sell their product and get an immediate return on their product because they are sustainable will be sorely disappointed. This is not what it's about. There is a longer term game here when we're thinking about sustainability in terms of, and I think you said it quite rightly, it's about we're in the business of building long-term credibility and integrity for the organization and helping to build that long-term legacy that also has a value, by the way, but it is not going to be one that's going to be seen per quarter or even per year. So this is about a longer-term investment in the longevity of your organization into the future. And so I think, it's much better to see sustainability as a medium to long-term investment in your business and its future, rather than seeing it as a mechanism in which to sell more of your product overnight because consumers like it more. The truth is, and there's a lot of evidence out there that suggests that doesn't even work with consumers because there's so much mistrust out there at the moment around this topic.
That's been great, Helen. I'm confident our listeners have gotten a lot out of this. I know I have, and I'll speak for Maria. I think she has as well, but she can speak for herself. But we want to thank you for coming on. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. This podcast is just one way ED4S supports sustainability education. So please follow us on LinkedIn. Follow Helen. Ask her if you have anything you want her to touch base on, or connect directly with us in the future for future learning opportunities. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Helen. Bye, everyone.
If today's episode sparked ideas for your team, visit ed4s.org. That's ed4s.org to explore our customizable corporate learning solutions or book a quick discovery call. You don't have to figure it out alone.